The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office leads our work on sanctions, and we've already designated more than 350 individuals and organisations linked to the Iranian regime, covering their military, security and judiciary. And we have sanctioned the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in its entirety. And our diplomatic network is coordinating with our friends and allies around the world to reinforce our response, including the United States of America, Australia, New Zealand, Canada and the European Union. The cowardly attacks planned by the Iranian regime on British soil violate the most elementary rules of diplomatic relations between states. I have twice summoned Iran's most senior diplomat in London to explain his government activities, most recently following Iran International's decision to temporarily relocate their broadcasting services. It is intolerable that any media outlet should be forced to leave the United Kingdom because of the Iranian regime and its threats to kidnap or murder their journalists. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have no doubt that every part of this House will share my outrage. And there is clear evidence that the Iranian regime continues to prepare operations against individuals in Europe and beyond. We have made representations to the Iranian Foreign Ministry. We emphasise in no uncertain terms our determination to pursue any Iranian agent who would harm the UK or our allies. We will also continue to work with our international partners to identify, to expose and to counter threats made against us. But the UK is clear that we need to go further. So today I am announcing to the House further measures. They constitute a toolkit that I would prefer not to use. But the decision on whether I do so or whether I do not is firmly in the hands of the Iranian regime itself. Turning to the measures, first, we will establish a new Iran sanctions regime. This will be the first wholly geographic autonomous sanctions regime that the UK has created since leaving the European Union. It will give us new and enhanced powers to counter Iran's hostile and destabilising activities in the UK and around the world, allowing us to impose asset freezes and travel bans on more of Iran's decision makers and those doing its bidding. In particular, we will have broader powers to target those involved in the regime's efforts to undermine peace, stability and security in the region and internationally, to address those who proliferate arms or weapons technology from Iran, those who undermine democracy, undermine the respect for the rule of law and undermine good governance, and those who carry out other hostile activities towards the UK and our partners, including threats to our people, property or national security. We expect to bring the necessary legislation to Parliament later on this year. Secondly, I can tell the House that today we have designated a further 13 individuals and entities responsible for serious human rights violations inside Iran. This package of sanctions includes 5 senior officials from Iran's notorious prison system, which is rife with torture and abuse of prisoners. It includes further measures targeting the Supreme Council of the Cultural Revolution as the organisation that enforces social and cultural norms that oppress Iranian citizens themselves. And we target 6 key actors responsible for suppressing freedom of expression online, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Cyber Defence Command and the Supreme Council for Cyberspace. Mr. Deputy Speaker, our actions are a direct response to the escalation of Iran's reprehensible behaviour in the UK. We are not seeking to escalate. Our aim is to prevent and deter hostile Iranian activity on British soil, as well as on the territory of our partners and allies. Let us remind ourselves, Iran is selling drones to Russia. They are attacking their neighbours. They even attack their own people when they stand up for human rights and the most basic of freedoms. It is my fervent hope that there will be brighter days ahead for the relationship between our two countries. But we cannot take any steps in that direction until the regime ceases its deplorable activities. And until that day comes, we will remain steadfast in our efforts to stop Iranian aggression and to protect the United Kingdom. I commend this statement to the House.
David Lammy.
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for advance sight and notice of his statement. In the last year, the charge sheet against the government of Iran has grown and grown. It has funded violent militia across the Middle East. It has supplied drones to Russia that menace Ukraine's cities, kill civilians and destroy infrastructure. It has continued to pursue its nuclear programme in breach of international commitments. And it has brutally suppressed the protests of young Iranians who dared to demand a better future. And in the last 12 months, it has executed more people than almost any country in the world. It continues to detain UK-Iranian dual nationals, including Murad Tabaz and Miran Rauf, and continues to harass and threaten dissidents, even those who've made their home here in the United Kingdom. That the security services have foiled 15 plots against British-based individuals shows the scale of this hostile activity. This worsening extraterritorial threat must be met with strong and clear action. We cannot tolerate efforts to harass, silence, or threaten the welfare of regime critics here in the United Kingdom. And we must ensure that Iranian and British journalists can operate without fear or intimidation. At the end of last year, I called for the United Nations Human Rights Council to urgently investigate Iran's crackdown on protesters and for the government to bring forward stronger sanctions against the Iranian regime. Labour has also called for a new joint FCDO Home Office state threat cell to coordinate the action in government. So we welcome the measures that the Foreign Secretary has announced today. The government will be aware of the long-standing strength of feeling from many sides of the House and from members of the Iranian diaspora on the question of prescription of the IRGC. Labour proposed a new mechanism for prescription for state-linked actors in the National Security Bill, but the government unfortunately did not support it. I understand, of course, that there are diplomatic dimensions to this question, but I'm sure this House would welcome an update from him on the issue. I also want to ask the Foreign Secretary about the fate of UK-Iranian dual nationals. Labour has for a long time called for a new legal right for consular assistance to help protect British nationals. The government has rejected this. In April, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee put forward proposals to overhaul the way the Foreign Office tries to secure the release of British nationals overseas. Today, the government has largely rejected these too. Is the Foreign Office complacent on this issue, and what steps will it take to bring British nationals detained in Iran and elsewhere home? Finally, I wanted to ask about the future of the JCPOA. We supported the nuclear agreement as the best approach to preventing Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, and we remain determined and committed to the vital non-proliferation goal. However, there is a clear and ongoing pattern of Iran breaching the JCPOA's terms, preventing monitoring and verification, and enriching uranium past the point of any civilian justification. And it's continued to violate UN Security Council Resolution 2231, including in its ballistic missile activities. The UK has a responsibility as one of the signatories of the JCPOA to take a leading role in containing Iran's nuclear ambitions and its related activities. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary about the prospects of negotiations on what some are calling a less-for-less deal? Mr. Deputy Speaker, Iran is a country with an extraordinary and ancient history. It's courageous people who've risked their lives over the past year in pursuit of freedom. They deserve a government that respects their rights. Until that day, Labour will continue to support action to hold the Iranian regime to account.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I echo the Right Honourable Gentleman's comments about the Iranian people. And I've said it before, but I said again, our quarrel is not with the Iranian people. Iran is a country, as he says, with a huge and fabulous history, a sophisticated people, but sadly they are being let down badly by those who are in positions of leadership. He asks our position, he asks us to update our position on prescription. Our position on prescription, I've discussed at the dispatch box before. We will always keep under review the response to Iranian state threats and other threats, some of which I've laid out in my statement to the House today. The RGC is sanctioned in its entirety, and certain individuals within it are individually sanctioned as well. But as I say, we do not regularly comment on future prescriptions or designations, but we do always keep our options under review. He makes a point with regard to the nature of our consular support. The government's position, we do not need a law for the government to do right by British people overseas, and we extend consular assistance to British nationals without the need for legislation instructing us to do so. And we do so even when the attention of the House is not focused on those individuals. There are many cases where we've had very successful consular outcomes for individuals who have never come into the consciousness of this House. We seek to do so always with the best interests of those British nationals at our heart. He will know that with regard to Iran, in certain circumstances, it is particularly difficult for us to discharge our duty and our responsibility for consular services, particularly of those people who are British dual nationals, because Iran does not recognise dual national status. But nevertheless, we will always seek to do right by those people who are incarcerated around the world, and indeed those people who are still in custody, incarcerated in Iran. And he speaks of the JCPOA. He is absolutely right that the UK is focused on ensuring that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons, technologies or capabilities. We work in close coordination with our friends in the E3 in the United States of America on this. It is a regular subject of conversation that I have with foreign minister colleagues across the Quad, and I can reassure him and the House that preventing the acquisition of nuclear weapons technology will remain a priority, the priority within our Iran strategy, and we will continue to explore ways of deterring Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon and preventing it from happening.
Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome this new geographically autonomous sanctions regime? It is an important step in demonstrating that defence is not an escalation and we will be strong at home. I also welcome the referral yesterday of Iran to the ICJ as a result of the shooting down of the Ukrainian aircraft in 2020, which the UK is doing with our allies. That again is a good step. As the Honourable Gentleman said this morning, we did release our report into hostage taking, and can I urge my right honourable friend to give us an update on Morad Tabas, because it matters that his name is heard time and time again, particularly given how ill he is. And finally, given that we have now created an autonomous regime, can I urge my honourable friend to consider a regime on the Chinese Communist Party? They have sanctions in this House, they continually perpetrate transnational repression, and this week alone they put bounties on the heads of 3 individuals who sought refuge here. And can I also ask him to haul in the Chinese ambassador to raise how unacceptable this is and how obscene and in breach of international law it is?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend raises important points, and I welcome her comments on the structures that we have put in place today and we'll be putting forward with legislation to the House in due course. We recognise that no one element of our response on its own will resolve all these issues, but they do have a cumulative effect. And I can assure her that we continue to work in close coordination with our international allies to maximise the impact of our sanctions response and to ensure that Iran recognises, as she said in her question, that this is a response to their actions. If they do not like this response, they should change their actions. And with regard to sanctions for other nations, she will know, but the House and the Department have heard the point that she's made. She will know that we do not routinely speculate on sanctions that we may bring forward. But I can assure her that whenever I have interactions with representatives of the Chinese government, I raise Hong Kong and the sanctioning of British parliamentarians and the fundamental disagreement we have with their actions in relation to the Uyghur Muslims at every single opportunity.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for prior sight of his statement. I'd like to begin by putting on record the SNP's broad support for this wide-ranging package of measures to be taken against the regime in Tehran. And the Foreign Secretary was absolutely right when he says that the exporting of international terrorism by Iran cannot and will not and must not be tolerated, and much of what is in this statement is what we on these benches, indeed this entire House, have been calling on for some time. But can I helpfully suggest that the legislation which will come before the end of the year needs to come as quickly as possible, and if the Foreign Secretary could even roughly put a date on when that might happen, that would be helpful. I'm pleased that action has been taken against those who are complicit in doing this brutal regime's bidding, whether it be military, security or their judiciary, and I welcome the news that 5 of the most senior officials from that barbaric prison system have been sanctioned too, particularly those in the notorious Evin prison, which Nazaddin Zaghari Ratcliffe was held in, which used as a brutal tool of repression against those many brave young women who recently stood up against the regime, and where they were held, tortured and murdered within that system. Could I also ask the Foreign Secretary to explain why the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have been sanctioned and not prescribed? We were told 6 months ago by the Security Minister that they were to be prescribed as a terrorist organisation, and I think many of us, on seeing the statement being heralded, would have thought that that would have been part of it, and what the difference between a sanctioned organisation and a prescribed organisation is. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, in light of what was contained the continued support that Iran has for Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, why has his department not tightened up further those Iran-specific export controls and sanctions on those dual-use companies to stop the export of materials to Iran from the UK that could subsequently be made into weapons? Thank you.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for welcoming the measures that we have taken. He asked once again about prescription, and he will have heard my earlier response. We always keep options available. I think within his question, he I think outlines one of the key issues on this. He says that his party are calling on the UK government to prescribe the IRGC, and then he goes on to say that he would like an explanation of the difference between prescription and sanctions. And I recognise that people see prescription as the most desired outcome without necessarily understanding that much of what I suspect people want to see from what they believe to be the outcome of prescription is actually already in place. Asset freezes, travel bans, and the suite of responses is kept constantly under review, but I can assure him we will always take actions, as we've set out in the statement today. We will always take actions that we believe are in the best interest of protecting the British nationals, both here and overseas, and also those Iranians who have made their home in the UK. He asked about the timetabling for legislation. The House will understand that is something that I'll need to discuss with the Leader of the House and the business managers, but I can assure him that we regard our response to Iran as a priority and will seek to bring this forward with as much expediency as we're able.
Teresa Villiers.
A constituent of mine has on repeated occasions raised serious concerns about the connections between the Islamic Centre of England and the IRGC in the Office of the Supreme Leader. He also believes there could be such connections between the Supreme Leader and an Islamic Centre in Manchester. So what is the government doing to ensure that UK-based charities like these two can in no way ever be a threat to the security of Iranian dissidents in the United Kingdom?
My right honourable friend raises a very important point. My department have discussed this with the Home Office, and indeed I have discussed this with my right honourable friend, the Security Minister. I can reassure her and the House that he takes very seriously indeed, the actions of organisations that she has mentioned, and obviously we wish to ensure that the Charity Commission also fully discharges its duty to make sure that any organisation under its remit is not used to harass or persecute foreign nationals or indeed British people here in the UK.
Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Issues that are faced by Iranian citizens, and especially women, are raised with me frequently by constituents in Putney and Southfields and Roehampton. I'm stopped in the street many times to talk about this issue. British-Iranian dual national Murad Tabaz has already been mentioned in this statement. He remains arbitrarily detained in terrible conditions in Iran, almost 4 years after he was sentenced in 2019. Could the Foreign Secretary say more about to the House about the last time that he raised Murad's case with his Iranian counterparts, and what strategy is in place to secure his release, difficult though that is?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the last time I had face-to-face contact with a representative, a minister of the Iranian regime was in 21. But my officials regularly raise consular issues, including detainees, with our Iranian counterparts. I can assure her and the House that this remains a priority. I have met with Murad Tabaz's family on a number of occasions. My right honourable friend, the Minister for the region, Lord Ahmed, has met with them very recently, I think within the last few weeks. This remains a priority for us, and I can assure her that we will continue to work with the United States of America, because he is a trinational, to bring about his permanent release and ability to come home and rejoin his family.
Deputy Speaker, in welcoming these sanctions, can I ask the Foreign Secretary to look at Iran's activities elsewhere? He's already mentioned the Russian drones, provision of Russian drones. I hear rumours that Iran have also provided drones to the Polisario in southern Algeria, which could destabilise a very fragile peace with the Moroccans in Western Sahara, a space that's governed by the UN. Indeed, it's perfectly credible that the Iranians are also involved in places like Tigray and South Sudan, destabilising a whole continent as a lever of political power.
My right honourable friend, who knows the continent of Africa and its politics incredibly well, is absolutely right to highlight the fact that Iranian malign activity is not restricted to its own near neighbourhood or indeed the United Kingdom. We look very carefully at the credible reporting of the support through military equipment, not just to Russia in their attack against Ukraine, but militia groups and other military groups in the region and across Africa. And I can reassure him that we will absolutely take that into consideration when it comes to any future sanctions response that we have towards the Iranian regime.
Deputy Speaker, may I start by welcoming his statement, and I look forward to supporting the legislation so it can pass as quickly as possible. We are all anxious to do whatever we can to support the people of Iran. Now, Mahsa Amini was an inspiration to women not just in her own country but across the world. and the fact that the people who did this to her, the IRGC, have not been held to account is itself a tragedy. Would the Foreign Secretary back the campaign, therefore, to rename the street of the Iranian embassy after her, so that every business card, every email, every piece of post that they have to receive and send has her name on it? It worked with South Africa and Nelson Mandela. I think the time is right to do it for her now.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady makes an incredibly important point about the courage of Iranian women, the courage genuinely beyond measure. I have seen open source footage of Iranian women and actually Iranian men standing up against the so-called morality police and others. She will know that the naming of thoroughfares is not a decision for central government, but rather for local government. But she makes an incredibly important point, and perhaps the planning committee of the local council might take that on board.
Bradley.
Much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Earlier this year, the British group of the Interparliamentary Union hosted an event for BBC Persian where we heard incredibly powerful testimony from the journalists that were reporting on the very incident that the Honourable Lady opposite referred to, those women's protests. The freedom of those journalists to report is under great threat from the Iranian regime. So I welcome very much what my right honourable friend has announced today. But can he confirm both the government's support for the continuation of BBC Persian service and that Iran International will be able to return to the UK?
My right honourable friend echoes the government's strength of feeling about media freedom. I can reassure her and the House that in my conversations with the very, very senior leadership of the BBC, I made a specific point about the importance of BBC Persia as part of the wider positive influence on the world that BBC World Service has had. We came to a funding arrangement with the BBC World Service to ensure that certainly for the life of this Parliament, there will be no language services closed, because I recognise that in times of disinformation and times of oppression, the voices of truth and freedom, as personified by the hard-working colleagues in the BBC Persian service, is more important than ever.
Mr. Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm slightly puzzled that the Foreign Secretary just told the Liberal Democrat spokesperson that foreign policy decisions can be passed to local authorities. I don't know what the Levelling Up Secretary would say about that. But I'm concerned very much by what he said a few moments ago about, in relation to my constituent Ali Reza Akbari, who was executed, as he knows, earlier this year, that he said that he hadn't had any direct contact with the Iranian regime for 2 years. And I know that the family wanted him to do that. There remain people like Morad Tabaz who are in custody in Tehran. Does he not think he should be doing more to try and get them released from that way, and that talking to the regime may be necessary?
Mr Deputy Speaker, I know the honourable gentleman had a long career in local government before he came to this House. Perhaps he would understand that street naming is not a foreign policy issue. It really is not. I can assure him that we do have regular and senior contact with representatives of the Iranian government. The Iranian regime has made it, through their own actions, they've made it harder for me to have engagement with them. However, that is not a blanket ban on engagement, but I can assure him that the plight of detainees and our desire to have them released and returned home is a very high priority in all the conversations that we have at all levels with representatives of the Iranian government.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome the action that my right honourable friend has announced to the House this afternoon. I think it's really important that the House should remain united and clear-sighted about the need to confront Iran's behaviour. The Foreign Secretary mentioned Russia's use of Iranian drone technology in Ukraine. We also understand that Putin is seeking to acquire Iran's ballistics weapons technology as well. Now, it's my understanding that a sunset clause in the JCPOA, if activated by the UK and the EU, would allow that to happen from October. So could the Foreign Secretary give a strong assurance to the House this afternoon that he will work in lockstep with our colleagues in the EU to make sure that that doesn't happen?
My right honourable friend makes a very important point with regard to our policy towards Russia's invasion of Ukraine, working to ensure that Russia is not supported through military equipment exports is one of our priority functions, and that is particularly true with regard to Iranian technologies, whether they be drone technologies or others. I absolutely take the point that he makes about the sunset clauses in JCPOA. We are very alive to that. It's a conversation I regularly have with my E3 and United States counterparts, and I can reassure him that preventing that brutal technology falling into the hands of Russia or indeed anyone else remains an absolute priority for the government.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Iran has made no secret of its efforts to arm, fund and train Palestinian terror groups in the West Bank. The leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad has even said that its terrorists depend on Iranian-supplied weaponry, the very same group which has turned Jenin into a city of terror. So I'm sure my right honourable friend will agree with me that we should condemn this destabilising activity, but far more than that, it is horrendous examples such as this that double underline the need for the very welcome toolkit of measures he has announced this afternoon, not just to have them in our own arsenal, but to use them.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I commend my honourable friend with for the passion and consistency of his championing of this issue. I completely agree with him that the support for violence and terrorism, not just in the West Bank but more broadly across the Middle East, is completely wrong, and we will always stand up against it. The sad truth is that the Palestinian people suffer because of the export of Iranian violence into the region. We continue to work as a cornerstone of our foreign policy to bring about peace between the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. That is not helped by the violent interference of Iran, and we will continue to take action to deter and prevent it.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome this package of strengthened sanctions. Last weekend I attended the Free Iran Global Summit, which was attended by a range of former Prime Ministers, former Vice Presidents, former Foreign Ministers, representatives from 52 parliaments and around 10 members and former members from across this place, which roundly, of course, condemns the gross violations of human rights in Iran, particularly the 300 uses of the death penalty, the oppression of women, but the killing also of 70 innocent children through shooting and poisoning. The conference discussed the issue of the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, I've heard what my right honourable friend has said about prescription of the organisation in its entirety, but would he assure me that he would keep that step very much under close review?
I can assure my honourable friend that we take a thoughtful approach, but a firm and decisive approach to our posture with regard to Iran. I will always keep all options under a review. We will always act in what we believe to be the best interests of our own security, but also the safety and security of our friends in the region. And indeed, as she has said, the Iranian people who find themselves brutalised by their own government. And so when I say we keep these things under review, I genuinely mean it, and nothing in terms of our response would be put permanently off the table or beyond use. But the announcements that I made today, added to the pre-existing sanctions packages, gives us a powerful tool of deterrent for Iranian behaviour, which we intend to utilise fully if Iran's behaviour doesn't change. And I will finish on this point, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The power is in Iran's hands. Were they to change their behaviour, were they to stop funding terrorism and militia groups in the area, were they to stop pursuing nuclear weapons, and were they to stop brutalising their people, we would be able to change our posture towards them. The power is in their hands.